We just finished the series on the Psalms 119 and just trying to think of exactly kind of what to do next. And so thinking a little bit about we hear it when the presidents have all done the State of the Union address, and we do a lot of those different types of things. So I thought about how about the State of the Church address? What we can do then to improve as a church and different things we can do. So, there are many companies. I know since it's been at the refinery, we have different ones, and each time we have a new group of leadership or a new merger, or like this last week, they just bought another company. They come up with these different slogans. The management does, like one was OMS, Operations Excellence Management Systems, in which the management basically is trying to then tell you the goals of the company and how we're going to get there. But the only way that works is if the people then obviously buy into the goals and the plans and then carry them out. Obviously, a slogan that President Trump has come up with, obviously ran through, is what? Make America what? Great again. Okay, obviously, but can he do it by himself? No. So it doesn't matter what the slogan is or what your plans are. You have to have the people and the leadership with which to do it. And so I think we have the same thing. So a question we can ask ourselves, obviously, is where is Dalton Hill at and where do we desire to be? There's decisions we all have to make. Obviously, the council was talked about it even this last time. It's over a year away, but do we have decisions to make, whether it be about the building? Obviously, we're not, we've been here and we have a contract we signed every so many years, and that's coming up. What do we do? And so those are all decisions that has to be made, and we can't. And those of you that know me, I'm not a person who's good at that kind of thing. I'm not an administrator or a planner. My brothers and uncles, some of them are very good at that. I hated playing chess with them for that reason. When I played chess, I rarely ever beat them, because when I played chess, you just move. Same thing with checkers. But with them, they'd sit there and ponder, and 10 minutes later, they'd decide a move. That just drove me nuts. And they were already anticipating my next move. And that's why they did as well as they did. We need people like that. So we need people to come alongside recognizing your strengths and weaknesses. So you think about it, we just got to reading what some of our past leaders have done and helped us along the way. But who have taken their place? And are there positions and things that we need to do that we can then get it there? So what I want to think about is sharing power with the right people at the right time. Sharing power with the right people at the right time. And it kind of came to my mind when we think about it. I think what happens is you have, you can see this throughout Scripture. We saw it on Wednesday night, so it's kind of the Lord has kind of laid it on my heart to talk about it. But look at Elisha, and let's look at what he has to say with Elisha in 1 Kings chapter 19. Let's see what we can come up with here. 1 Kings chapter 19, the first one is sharing power with the right people at the right time, is to be called in God's timing. To be called in God's timing. Now, Elijah, if you remember, has already dealt with Ahab and Jezebel and confronted the different people. And God has now brought him back. In 1 Kings 19, notice in verse 16. 1 Kings 19 and verse 16, God speaking to Elijah. And he says, "And Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall appoint king over Israel." And Elisha, notice he said, "You shall anoint as prophet in your place." So notice what he's telling us is God's man to take Elijah's place was who? Elisha. And who was supposed to go anointing? Elijah. So I think part of it is God's call and God's timing. How many times are we willing to think on the replacement? Okay, Elijah, you've had a great ministry, but the time for you is over. It's about over, and we need someone to take your place. Same thing happened, you think about with Moses and then with Joshua. Joshua came along and took Moses' place. How easy would it be to take Moses' place? How easy would it be to take Elijah's place? None of these would be easy to do. And so notice then we have to think about is God's person and God's call. There are many other prophets, and you'll see in the next couple of chapters, there's plenty of other prophets who God could have chosen. But God chose Elisha to take Elijah. They had their part, the other prophets. They just weren't going to be the leading prophet to do it. But it's interesting, God's call is real similar. You think about in the book of Acts, chapter 13, you remember they were praying and fasting, and then in verse 2, the Holy Spirit says, set apart for me Paul and what? Barnabas for the work of the ministry that I have to show. If you were that church, think about it, how many of you would like to lose Paul and Barnabas from your group? I mean, you think about it, that would be a great asset, and how many of you would like to lose it? And so I think it's interesting when you think about losing that. So the first thing, just the call and God's timing is God laying on your heart to do something at Dalton Hill. We can come up with all kinds of lists of what needs to be done, but if we don't have the personnel to do it, what difference does it make? So is God laying on your heart that you want to do something, and there's something you want to do? It reminds me, I don't know if you saw the article. We saw the article of Life Church and the founder and what really got it going. Did you see that article in the paper a couple of weeks ago? It's an amazing article, and basically it has to do with electronics. And he had gone to these IT people, and they'd come up with this app, and people have been trying to tell them they ought to sell it for $1, and they said, no, the Lord showed us how to do it, we're going to give it away. And it was over $30 million they would have made had they charged. He said even to this day they refused to charge. That's what got Life Church going. It has to do with the technology and what they wanted to do in the IT department. And he's given credit. That's something we want to do. And they helped develop it. We made mistakes and done it better. And this is what you have to have the right. You can come up with the idea, but if you don't have the people with which to do it, and so we have the thing to think about. So I think about it with, in the book of Acts 2 and Acts 6, they had a need, but they couldn't the leaders shouldn't leave and go do it. It reminds me, I know you all are talking about painting, and Tommy and Jerry had gotten the room ready and stuff, and I thought about before last year I was going to take a day of vacation and doing it and stuff, and I thought, well, really, that's not what I should do. Because my position is I should be doing what I do, but I shouldn't be doing what somebody else can do. And I'm taking a job away from them if I go do it. Yes, I can do it, and I'm willing to do it, but I shouldn't take a job from somebody else. I should let them do it. And that's hard because a lot of times you just see a need and you want to do it. But I think there's times when you just have to let somebody else do it. So you're looking at it. So first of all, when you talk about sharing power with the right people at the right time, it's got to be God's call, but it's got to be God's time. Think about it with David. David was anointed king. That was God's call. But what about God's time? When did he actually start serving as king? You're talking about years later. But what did David do in the meantime? How much preparation did he go through to get him to where he needed to be? Most of the Psalms and stuff that he probably wrote during that time. He really developed a relationship with him. So I think just because we seem like we may think we're on the sidelines, God's developing us. So first of all, God's call and God's time. Notice the second thing is counting the cost. Look over in the same chapter, go down to verse 19. Come up, and then we'll have it also in 2 Kings. So he departed, talking about Elijah, from there and found Elisha, while he's plowing with 12 pairs of oxen before him. He was with the 12th. So how many pairs of oxen do they have? So they have a total of how many? So do you think he's coming from a wealthy background? Notice he's using just one of the team. There's others using the other teams, coming from a wealthy background. Okay, so I want you to think about it. Elisha passed over him and threw his mantle on him. Obviously that would be a symbol of taking his place and coming with him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, please let me kiss my father and my mother, then I'll follow you. So then he said, go back again, for what have I done to you? So he returned from following him and took the pair of oxen and sacrificed them, boiled their flesh and implements of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate it. And he arose and followed Elijah and ministered to him. What did he do with his pair of oxen? Can he go back to plowing? There's no turning back. He offered that sacrifice. That was his work. I'm following Elijah. There's no turning back. I think it's important, when you're counting the cost, he counted the cost. And there's no turning back. Also, notice he said he followed Elijah and ministered to who? Elijah. He's working in a subservient role. Joshua did the same thing. How many times do, when we feel like we were wanting to do something for the Lord, we need to start at the top? And notice he's serving under Elijah. We're not told how long he served, but he served under Elijah for a time. I think one of the best things we can do, it's one of the problems I think that we have with our system that we have. A person goes off to OBU or to seminary or whatever, and they get their degree, they're a young man, and they get their degree, and they immediately are then put in charge of what? A church. And they're young, but they haven't sat under somebody that can really help them and minister along the way. And it's difficult to understand that. Quite often it's in a small church, and so there's a lot of learning. And how many people have dropped out of the ministry because they didn't get along where they could sit underneath of somebody and develop. And there isn't an accountability. So think about it. But with all of us, we do the same thing. Whether it's in a pastor, but all of us in a role that we have. Am I willing to feel like this is what God wants me to do, but I'm willing to get underneath of somebody and learn from them how to do things. So notice there you have that, first of all, there's no turning back, but he had the heart of a servant. He was willing to go from this background, a wealthy background, to sit underneath of Elijah. Go over to 2 Kings now. We can pick up on our story. 2 Kings chapter 2. Still talking about counting the cost. And it came about when the Lord was about to take Elijah by whirlwind to heaven, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. So they go from Gilgal to Bethel. Okay? Any of you ever looked up how far that is? And what type of transportation did they have? And they got in their SUV and drove, right? Okay, so notice they just barely get down there. Notice in verse 3, the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elijah and said, "Do you know that the Lord will take your master from you, over you today?" And he said, "Yes, I know, be still." Elijah said, "Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." Hey, we just got here. Now he's sending him to Jericho. Same answer. "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. Same thing happens in 5. They tell him he's going to leave. He says, "I know." Then notice in 6. Elijah says to him, "Please stay here. The Lord has now sent me to Jordan." Now, how many of you are getting kind of upset, all right? You're on foot, all right? The Lord's laying on your heart. We need to go down to Broken Arrow, all right? So you walk to Broken Arrow. You get to Broken Arrow. The Lord is saying, "Now we need to leave Broken Arrow. We're going to Coweta." You now get to Coweta. Oh, the Lord's laying on our heart. We need to go to Porter. Why would the Lord be doing this? Testing. It's a testing. Are you willing to pay the price to do the Lord's will? Going from place to place. He doesn't tell them why they went. Did he ever tell you why they went to Bethel to begin with? Does he ever tell you why they went to Gilgal, to Jericho? No. He just said, the Lord tells us we need to do something, we need to do it, and we don't count the cost. We count the cost, but we're willing to pay the price. So I think it's interesting. But notice also in verse 9, he's going to be taken up. And notice what Elisha asked. Now it came about, they crossed over, talked about the Jordan. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I'm taken away." And Elisha said, "Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." When he's asking for that, if you look at Deuteronomy, a double portion would be given to the firstborn or those who is going to take your place. So there's many other prophets, and Elisha is asking Elijah, "I want to take your place as being the leading prophet for Israel." And he's then talking about that only God can give. But I think anytime we're wanting to do something for the Lord, it should be a desire of ours. How many times have people put guilt trips on you? When people put guilt trips on you to serve, you might do it, but are you doing it with the right reason, and how long will you continue? People do that for giving or anything else. We can't have this if you all don't give, and we're going to have to close this door. But what happens when the Lord lays it on their heart? You looked out to the Old Testament. When the Lord laid it on their heart to give, what did they have to do? They had to stop and tell the people, stop giving, we have enough. Let the Lord lay it on a person's heart. But it's interesting. First of all, it has to be God's calling and God's time. But then the second thing, we have to count the cost. Elijah was counting the cost. He knew what it was going to take. He was giving up a lot, but he was willing to do it. And whatever God was telling him to go, he would go there, whatever it took. So I think about, you have the same thing in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. Remember, it says, if anyone desires the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. So whether it be church counsel or anything else, or Sunday school teacher, or passing out bulletins, whatever it might be, it is something that you desire to do. Never forget, years and years ago, it's 45 years ago, I remember being in a church, and a person, basically, they're needing someone to serve, would be equivalent to our council. They called it something else. And I remember them saying, well, I'll attend those meetings, but don't ask me to do anything else. Well, is that the type of leadership that you want? And so I think it's important we look at, is it something you desire? If it's not, then find something else you do desire to do and do the best you can in whatever that might be. So I think it's important, counting the cost. Let me give you some examples. I'm talking about counting the cost. But never forget, Will and Casey, talked about in the near future, a year or two, whatever, or maybe starting a family. But notice that what's been interesting in watching is they have got a dog and they've got a cat. It's been great training grounds for them. It's great training ground. Here they go off and we go to a movie, and then all of a sudden, a few weeks ago, you want to come over to the house? And they said, well, yeah, but we got to go home. We got to let the dog out. They go out of town. They got to do something about what they can do with the animals. Great training ground. They're counting the cost of what it is to have the same thing with Jesse when she goes out of town, or Ruthie. One of the things about the animals, hey, it's your animal. Now, who's going to feed it? Who's going to take care of it? Who's buying the food? All those things. It's training grounds to counting the cost. So we can do that. Same thing happens. There's other times. You remember when Will was real young, and Jean did it also with the other kids, the girls as well. They'd come down to work with me. Do you think it's easier for me to have Will working with me when he's 7 or 8 years old, or do you think it's easier for me to do the job by myself? Do you think there's any type of parts you had to do twice? Okay, but that's counting the cost, because you're wanting them to learn work ethic. You're wanting to learn that. Did it cost Jean anything in time and everything else to go Broken Arrow all the way to Tulsa to drop them off and going all the way back? You count the cost because of the benefit down the road of the training. We have to do the same thing. If you have people, it's easier just to do it yourself so often, but that will not be good for you or them in the future. So think about it. Matthew 19, you remember when Jesus was talking to Peter and the disciples, and Peter said, we have given up everything for you. What do we get? He said, you'll rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. So basically what they're doing, if you think about the line and the dot, Peter is saying what? We are giving up everything in the dot part of it. What are they getting in the future? So think about it. Sharing power with the right people at the right time. One has to do with calling and God's timing. The second thing is we have to count the cost. The person who's willing to do it. I'll give you the third thing. We have this with Elijah. Look over in chapter 4, Elisha, I should say. In chapter 4, you'll notice help is in and from the Lord. And notice what happens. Crisis leads to opportunity. And what happens so often, when crisis happens, it becomes an opportunity. I know when I was mowing yards, all of a sudden you have crisis. You have too many yards, you can't get them done. There isn't enough you can do. So what do you have to do? You're going to have to get somebody to help you. Then what type of leader are you going to be? Are you going to do it all? Can they weed eat as well as you can when they start out? No. Can they run the equipment as well as you can? No. So if you try to do it all, what happens? You run into trouble. So notice that what happens with this crisis that you have, there's different ones that you have in this chapter. several of them actually. The first one happens to do in verse 1 down to verse 7, and it has to do with a widow whose husband got in debt, and the collector comes, and the husband dies, and according to the Old Testament, then the children then would have to become basically slaves of the person that they're indebted to until they paid off the debt. And she is a widow of the prophet. And she's coming then to Elisha. What do I do? A crisis leads to an opportunity. What would you do if you were Elisha? It's interesting. He asked her, if you look in the text, he asked her, what do you have in the house? And all she has in the house is a jar of oil. He then tells her, she then tells the sons, because they are also part of this, they're going to have to pay this debt. Go find all the jars in the house and fill them with oil from this one jar. Now, whenever I've had a quart of oil and I pour it into another quart or I pour it into a gallon, guess what happens? I only have a fourth of a gallon when I pour it in there. But notice, it is a crisis leads to an opportunity. It had to be a walk of faith for the woman and her two sons to go do it. They pour it until they fill up all the jars. So this one quart just keeps pouring and pouring and pouring until all the jars they had are full. They then go and sell the oil. They pay the man the debt. The sons are no longer going to have to be slaves. And they can then live on the other part. A crisis led to what? An opportunity, but they had to be obedient and walk of faith, because that makes no sense to do what they were asked to do. And to think about it, that's a walk of faith on Elisha's part too. Go do this. Because this is what's going to happen. They had to go do it. It's interesting, and you go to another one in chapter, they have all this, the next 4 or 5 chapters are just filled with these. In 38, there's a national crisis. They had a famine. And then verse 38, there's a famine, and they go and they collect whatever vegetables, whatever things they could find to make a stew. And people are collecting. It'd be kind of like me. If I go out and collect things, I wouldn't know what was good and what was bad. In fact, I was asked, somebody handed me a mushroom and it looked disgusting, and they said it tastes like chicken. And said they ate it. And they had a family a couple weeks ago. I'll take your word for it. If I'm going to eat a mushroom, it's going to be one that I know is not poisonous. But they ate it. So notice then, they have this poison, and people all of a sudden recognize it. Elisha then takes meal and puts it in the pot. Now, if you put meal in the pot of stew, what's the meal normally going to do? It's just going to thicken it. Is it going to change whether it's poisonous or not? Elisha then says, eat it, it's fine. If I offer it to you and say it is fine, what are you going to do? You go first, right? It's kind of like one new person going across the Niagara Falls in a wheelbarrow on a tightrope, and they turned to the audience and said, "Do you think I can carry somebody across?" This actually did happen. And the person in the audience raised his hand and said yes. Now, it happened to be his partner, so that's why they did it. But if that's true, if you really believe I can, how are you going to get in the wheelbarrow? If you believe it, you're going to do what? You're going to get in the wheelbarrow. Notice they did, and they ate it. A crisis, a walk of faith, led to an opportunity. But notice something else that's interesting. When you go a little bit further in the text, the second part starts in 42 to 44. So the nation had something to eat. But then notice you have a person, if you're in a time of famine, let's just think about it in Oklahoma on our terms here. Okay, I have a neighbor has some property. He had a lot of property. Bob knows him. Well, he has one piece of property. He's getting ready to make a vineyard out of it, or it makes a orchard out of it. And he told me that if I wanted to bale it, I could have the hay. So you think about it, with the girls and the hay, I thought, well, that'd be a pretty good opportunity. Try to cross the street, just have to move the hay across. But let's say that last year it produced 100 bales. But now you have a famine, meaning dry. How many bales do you think you're going to get? Let's say 30. That's where the story is at here. So a person, according to the Old Testament, are you supposed to bring first fruits of your harvest? So you go from 100 bales, now you're at 30. If you are given, this used for numbers sake, 10%. So if I have 100 bales, I give the Lord how many? 10, I have 90 left. If I only have 30 bales, how am I going to make it? But the scripture says to give the Lord what? First fruits. I give him how many? 3. That now leaves me how many? 27 left. So instead of having 90, I'm all the way down to 27. But he's being obedient. Notice then what they do. They take this small amount that they're given, and then he tells the people, rather than keep it, they're hungry, let's feed the people. Oh, there's not near enough food. God multiplies the food of the first fruits that were given. They fed the entire audience. But it had to start with what? The one person who was being obedient to bring his first fruits during a time of famine for it to take place. Was there a crisis? Yes. But there's also an opportunity. And I think it's important for us to recognize the difference. Because so often we see a crisis, but we don't recognize it can be an opportunity. In our own life or anything else, God allows things to happen. There's a crisis, but there's also an opportunity. And so that's what happens here. You have in chapter 6, you then have Naaman. You remember that, let's just think about that one with Naaman in chapter 5. If you remember, the king has this general, who's a great general, and he has leprosy. And so it's interesting when you notice in verse 2, the Aramans had gone out in bands and taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, I wish that my master were with the prophet who's in Samaria, then he would cure his leprosy. If you are that young girl and you're taken captive, how many of you would say, hey, he can be cured, and I wished he met Elisha because he could do it. You notice, is there a crisis? But who could care less about him? But who would point him to him? How many of us know the answer, but we have the faith of the young girl to say, if he just met Elisha, he could be healed. And in the story, then obviously he does. But it started with what? A young girl who told him about the miracle could take place. You ever wonder if that might have been why the young girl was taken captive? If you were the parents, how would you feel? Think about it. You have a little bit later on, you get into chapter 6, you have some more about the axe head, and then you have the one you remember when the king is basically attacking Israel. And Elijah, it keeps telling the king of Israel, don't go over there because the enemy's coming. So they keep moving around. And every time, so the foreign king is so mad, he says, where is Elisha at? I'm going to go get him. So he goes, if you look, you'll find this story in chapter 6. He goes to Dalton with his chariots and everything else. He surrounds the city at early morning. Elisha's servant then comes out. You pick this up in chapter 6 and verse 17, or verse 16 and 15. And Elisha tells his servant, don't worry, there's more on our side. He then prays, and God opens the eyes of his servant, for he sees God's angels in his army. And there's more, obviously, of them than of the enemy. Is that true today? You know, I think so often there's a crisis, there's an opportunity, but we have more on our side in 1 John 4:4 than ever on the opposite side. And so then God then does it, leads to blindness and then leads to peace. Had they tried to fight him, many people would have lost lives, if not have been captured. Because they went God's way, a crisis leads to an opportunity. And as long as this king then lived the rest of his time, there was peace between them. Because they did. Crisis led to an opportunity. And so I think it's interesting we have the same thing that you have. So let's think about that part, the crisis. What critical needs do we have at Dalton Hill? We have to answer those. There can be different ones. Is he bringing us people to fill those? Or maybe he's laying on your heart to do something. You haven't done it in the past? What is that? How many times do we automatically have used the word no? We've not done it in the past, or we've done it and it's not done well. Therefore, we say, no, we won't do it now. Whereas at work, you don't want to do something, but your boss says you have to do it, so what happens? You do it. Well, we have a boss upstairs, too, that's telling us to do something. And we made anything. So crisis leads to opportunity. Let me give you something else. I think if somebody wants to do something, how many of us will get behind them? We've never done that. We haven't done whatever. You look at it, so many things that we've done now, why people have come and started attending and so on, is because of things we didn't do 5 years ago. Whether it be the Facebook, the messages, doing different stuff. I don't know how to do that, and different ones have done it, and we have done that, and it's worked. The same thing can happen with other things. But I think one of the fourth thing, besides crisis leads to opportunity, with God's calling, considering the cost, is the challenge to leaders. What type of leader are we? Let me just give you like 4 different types of leaders, and we're all leaders, whether we realize it or not, in different aspects. How many of you have ever been around the keyless leader? They don't have a key. In other words, they can't open anything, but they can offer people everything. You know, let me give you an example. You all come tomorrow to the refinery and I'll give you a tour. Do I have any authority to get any of you into the refinery? No. I can't offer you something. I don't have the key to get you in. I can't get you through the front gate. But how many times we can offer things, and then we're offering things we don't have the key to do. But then you also have have you ever been around the key hoarding leader? You know, it reminds me of somebody, especially young, when a person buys a brand new car. How many of them are going to let you drive it? How many are going to let you get close to it? You know, at key hoarding, you know, so they're in charge, they're responsible, they're hoarding it. The only person that's going to drive the car is them, and you're lucky to get in the car, and it depends upon what you look like, whether you're even allowed in the car. You ever been around leaders like that? Key hoarding, everything has to go. You also have the one I think about, what about the key loaning? I loan you the key, but don't forget whose key is it. It's mine. You know, I know Jesse and different, when they wanted to borrow my truck to haul the trailer, to haul the horses, that's not easy to do. Yeah. Here you go. But you have to also, you train them on it, you try to work with them. Not any different when a person, you know, we think, we're talking about Kelsey and going up for a driver's test, well, they've been practicing doing different things. You do the same thing. So you, as a driver, you're given responsibility. You do a little at a time. You ride with them. You try to correct them. The hardest part for me when I did with my kids was they never seemed to want to brake early enough before the intersection. And when they go to make a turn, it's like, there's a turn. I see it. And then you're in the windshield and they finally go around to it. You're following too close. They hit the brake. You're in the back seat. You know. Those are key loaning. And we want to, but then we want to keep taking it back. And what happens is we need to become a key chain leader. What do I mean by key chain? I'm helping them, I'm showing them, and doing them, but when they're responsible, I give them the key. And they then take it and run with it. It's not any different. We've given the keys to Shelley and to Barbara and others when we've done. I don't know anything about. She has this up here and I'm being recorded. All I know is I push the button if she's not here. The rest of the time, I do nothing. She and Mark take care of it. It's a need. We don't know how to do it. They're meeting the guidelines that we like, and we let them do it. Well, there's others that we have ministries out here that people may want to do. I know nothing about it. I just want to get behind them to help them do it. Enable them, and then let them do it. So when we have this sharing, this responsibility that we have, sharing the power of the right people at the right time, is it God's call and God's calling on their life? I don't know. But when it is, they will have to look at the cost. It's going to cost them. But then I need to get behind them and help them in any way I can. And there will be opportunities. There will be crises. There always are. The first mistake, your kids call, are all crying, Dad, I had a wreck. Okay, where are you, right? And immediately in the back of your mind, you go through all kinds of things. All part of the learning process. It can be all kinds of things. So think about it, and what kind of leader and what type of leader are we, and am I willing to share my responsibilities? I'll just give you an example. It happened to me when I was doing my yards, and I used to, when I first started off, and I started getting a lot of people helping me. We were growing, every neighbor coming around wanting you to do more and more, and you start on 1 on a block, then I had 9 on the block, and then I went around the corner, I had 1 on the block, you ended up with 15 on the block. You pull up and just do 15 yards in a row. Well, what would happen is you'd start getting guys, you'd show them how to mow, that's the easiest part. But then when it comes to edging and the weed eating and doing the hedges, so what happens is I was doing all of it. So I'd send them off to go get a drink or go to the bathroom. I'd stay behind to try to catch up and do all this. Well, then what happens in the spring when the customer comes out? And each one of them wants to talk to you and has a special job. What happens then? All the mowing's done, and what's the help do? They're just standing there. It's not their fault. It's whose fault? Because I didn't train them. So then I'm having to figure out who's good on a weed eater, who's good on a blower. But you start training them early in the year, so when they hit a plant or hit something, it's early and they'll grow back. You don't start doing that in August, because they hit something with a weed eater in August, it's dead. And there's certain ones you'll find that you can't turn them loose with a weed eater because everything they touch is dead. So you just find out who can do what, but then you turn them loose. Being left-handed, I weed eat going one direction. Most of them were right-handed. They would do it differently. But the key is what? Is it getting done and done right? So you have to let them do it the way they want to do it. They would blow going one direction. I'd blow going another direction. As long as it's getting done. So I think it's important when we turn it over to people, we have guidelines, but then give them the liberty to work with their personalities. And there's some that, I had a couple, I'll never forget, in 2 weeks' time, he was working for me, bless his heart. First of all, he was following me. I had a truck and trailer, and I made a turn. He follows behind me, and he hits the curb. How in the world can I turn something that big and you hit and you blow a tire on, brand new tire on his vehicle, $120? Then a little bit later on, I said, we're mowing. I said, okay, watch out for your vehicle. Don't scrape the side with the lawnmower. He walks by, scrapes the whole side of his car, grabs the mower, jerks back, scrapes it coming back on the beautiful thing, John. I thought, man, this is a disaster waiting to happen. It wasn't later in the week. I said, would you go get this out of the truck? He runs to go get it out of the truck. He runs underneath the tree limb, hits it, I had to take him to the hospital and get stitches in it. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of dollars. He worked 2 weeks and he was in a hole. And I was in the hole. I was going to have to talk to him, and he came to me and said, I really think God wants me to go back to school. That's happened a couple. He recognized this was not good for me. And I knew I would go broke if I kept him on. We all have it. Some things we're good at, some things we're not, but you don't know till you try. And you have to be willing to let people try. 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 Willing to let people try.